In a quiet Texas city, a 15-year-old boy is accused of one of the most horrific crimes imaginable, shooting and killing his ex-girlfriend's mother and her two younger siblings in Odessa, Texas. How does someone so young commit such a brutal and shocking act? What pushed this teenager past the point of no return? The tragedy unfolded on a seemingly ordinary evening, in a community where violence like this was unimaginable. The impact of these murders was felt not just in Odessa, but across the country. The devastating loss of innocent lives raised haunting questions about the darker side of adolescence and the potential consequences of unresolved emotional turmoil. The details of this crime are as chilling as they are tragic. A teenager, who should have been focused on school, friends, and his future, instead became the perpetrator of a senseless act of violence that would forever change the lives of his victims, their families, and the community. The victim's family was well-loved and well-known in Odessa, which made the crime even harder for people to comprehend. But how did a 15-year-old, who was still in the early stages of life, become capable of something so horrific? In this episode of Real Crime Tales, we'll take you through the events that led to this brutal triple murder. From the troubled background of the young suspect to the emotional strain that fueled his violent outburst, we'll uncover the details of the case and explore the psychological factors that might have contributed to such a tragic crime. As we dive deeper into the investigation, we'll ask the difficult questions. What warning signs were missed? Could this tragedy have been prevented? Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on our next in-depth look at real-life crime stories. And feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think could have stopped this tragedy? What do you believe led this teenager down such a dark path? Now, let's begin with a heartbreaking story of a triple murder that rocked the small town of Odessa, Texas. On a Tuesday evening in Odessa, Texas, a call came through to the local police that would forever change the lives of three innocent people in the entire community. Officers responded quickly to the scene, arriving at the 87th Street Apartments, a quiet, unassuming neighborhood where violence like this was unheard of. But when the police entered the apartment, they were met with a horrific sight. 3 bodies, each shot multiple times in a brutal and senseless act of violence. The victims were 39-year-old Jessica Rodriguez, a mother who was known for her kind heart and tireless dedication to her children. Alongside her were her 2 children, 13-year-old Daniel and 9-year-old Sophia. All 3 had been tragically taken from this world far too soon. Jessica, a single mother working hard to provide a stable life for her kids, had just been starting a new chapter in her life. Her children, full of promise and potential, had their futures violently ripped away from them. The police immediately described the act as tragic and cowardly, noting that the sheer brutality of the crime was difficult to comprehend. At first, there was confusion, a random act of violence, a robbery gone wrong. But soon, investigators began piecing together the story. It became clear that this was not a random attack. Authorities quickly identified the suspect, a 15-year-old boy, in a shocking turn of events, had been known to the victims. The boy, whose name was not initially released due to his age, had been in a relationship with Sophia, Jessica's daughter, but their bond had become strained in recent weeks. The breakup had left him emotionally wounded and increasingly unstable. The suspect originally intended to confront his ex-girlfriend at school, but something changed along the way. Instead of following through with his original plan, he decided to take a much darker path. He headed straight to Sophia's home. There, in a place where he had once been welcomed, he allegedly committed the unthinkable. Authorities believe that in a fit of rage, fueled by jealousy and rejection, the teenager shot Jessica, Daniel, and Sophia multiple times. The attack was swift, violent, and calculated, yet also deeply personal. After carrying out the murders, the suspect fled the scene on foot. But less than an hour later, he was apprehended by local law enforcement, who had quickly zeroed in on him as a suspect. The rapid response from the Odessa Police Department and the cooperation of the community helped capture him before he could flee or cause further harm. It was a swift arrest, but it didn't erase the horror of what had happened inside that apartment. The crime sent shockwaves through Odessa. How could a young boy, just 15 years old, be capable of such an unthinkable act? The community, and even his own family, were left in disbelief. The brutality of the crime, coupled with the fact that the suspect was someone so young, made this tragedy all the more difficult to understand. But as the investigation continued, the story began to unfold, revealing a much deeper, more complex picture of a troubled teenager whose unresolved pain and anger had finally exploded in the most violent way possible. As the Odessa police officers arrived at the scene around 5:45 p.m., they were immediately confronted with the grim reality of what had unfolded in the Rodriguez family's apartment. Inside, they found the bodies of Jessica Rodriguez, her 13-year-old son Daniel, and 9-year-old Sofia. The sight was both heart-wrenching and horrifying. The victims had been shot multiple times, their lives taken in cold blood. The brutality of the act was evident, and it became clear that this was not a random attack. This was personal. Within minutes, the investigators began their process of collecting evidence and speaking to witnesses. Their first major breakthrough came when they realized there had been no forced entry into the apartment. The lack of signs that the family had been attacked by a stranger pointed to one undeniable fact: the killer was someone who knew them. This revelation sent the investigation in a new direction, as it quickly became clear that the suspect had been someone close to the family. Within about 40 minutes, the police had zeroed in on their prime suspect, a 15-year-old boy who had a history with the family. He had been in a relationship with Sofia, Jessica's daughter, but their bond had recently soured. Though the specifics of their breakup had yet to be fully confirmed, it was evident that the teenager's emotional turmoil, stemming from rejection and unresolved anger, played a crucial role in the tragedy. As the investigation continued, officers managed to track down the suspect, who had fled the scene immediately after the murders. The young boy was apprehended not far from the apartment complex. When they detained him, police recovered a handgun believed to be the weapon used in the killings. The weapon was found on him, and forensic evidence confirmed that it was consistent with the type of gunshot wounds the victims had sustained. The evidence pointed to the teenager's involvement, and the brutality of the crime confirmed that this was a premeditated act, not something that had occurred in a moment of impulsive rage. Though the specific motive for the crime had not been publicly disclosed at that point, it was clear that the suspect's relationship with the victims played a key role in the murders. Investigators confirmed the teenager had been in a tumultuous relationship with Sofia, and his emotions had been running high in the days leading up to the crime. He had been struggling with feelings of rejection and anger toward her, and his emotions had likely been further exacerbated by personal issues at home. The details of his troubled home life began to surface, showing a pattern of emotional instability that could have been a warning sign. His family life, marked by neglect and instability, had left him without the emotional tools needed to process rejection or frustration. This, combined with his obsessive attachment to Sofia, set the stage for the deadly confrontation that ended the lives of 3 innocent people. As the investigation unfolded, the tragic nature of the case became even more apparent. What had started as a troubled teenager's emotional breakdown had escalated into a violent and deliberate act of revenge. The community was left stunned, unable to comprehend how a young boy, someone who had been part of the family, someone they had all known, could be capable of such brutality. But with the evidence stacking up against him, it became undeniable that Nathaniel was the one responsible for the murders. The question that remained was why, and how someone so young could be driven to commit such an unthinkable act. The suspect at the center of this devastating crime is a 15-year-old boy whose name, due to his age, has not been publicly released. At the time of his arrest, he was being held at the Ector County Youth Center, awaiting further legal proceedings. The severity of the charges against him was unmistakable. He was facing capital murder of multiple persons, a charge that under Texas law carries some of the most severe penalties available. The weight of the charge reflected the brutality of his actions and the irreversible nature of the violence he had committed. Officials were careful in their statements to the press, noting that while the teenager had some prior contact with law enforcement, it had been related to a non-violent family matter. This history raised a few eyebrows, but it wasn't enough to signal any violent tendencies in his past. In fact, according to police reports, There had been no known history of violent behavior or any documented threats of this magnitude before the tragic attack on the Rodriguez family. This left many wondering, what triggered this sudden escalation? How did a young boy, who had no significant history of violence, go from being a seemingly typical teenager to committing such a horrific crime? The lack of any violent history prior to the murders made the situation even more perplexing. Many people in the community knew Nathaniel as a quiet, somewhat troubled boy, but nothing indicated that he was capable of the kind of violence that had just taken place. The absence of prior incidents left law enforcement and the public struggling to understand the rapid and drastic transformation in his behavior. How could this emotional turmoil have led to such a brutal act of violence? What was it about his relationship with Sophia and the overwhelming rejection that triggered the final, deadly confrontation? Nathaniel's family and friends were left in shock. The boy they had known, who had shown no previous signs of becoming violent, had crossed a line that few could understand. The tragedy forced everyone to reflect on the signs they might have missed, the little moments when his emotional struggles, deepened by an unstable home life, began to outweigh his ability to cope. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that Nathaniel's emotional state in the days leading up to the murders was critical in understanding his actions. Despite his apparent lack of a violent past, his attachment to Sophia and the feelings of rejection he harbored had built up in a way that became too much for him to handle. His inability to process these emotions, combined with his troubled background, turned what might have been a typical teenage heartbreak into a catastrophic and violent event. The community continued to grapple with the fact that a young boy, someone they might have seen every day, could be capable of such a shocking and devastating act. Nathaniel's story, still unfolding, is a tragic reminder of the emotional struggles that many young people face, often without the support they need. What was once a typical teenager's heartbreak turned into a fatal tragedy that left the entire community forever changed. As the case moved through the legal system, questions lingered about how someone so young could be held accountable for such a violent crime, and whether he would ever fully understand the weight of his actions. The victim's family was left utterly shattered by the brutal killings. Although the ex-girlfriend, Sophia, was the initial intended target of the 15-year-old boy's violence, she was miraculously unharmed during the attack. The fact that Sophia managed to escape physically unharmed was both fortunate and deeply traumatic for her. For someone who had been so closely involved in the tragic events, the emotional toll of losing her mother and younger brother while narrowly escaping death herself was unimaginable. Sophia's grief was compounded by the confusion and horror of realizing that the person responsible for the deaths of her loved ones was someone she had once known intimately. While Sophia survived physically, the psychological scars she would carry from witnessing the aftermath of the crime were beyond comprehension. She was forced to come to terms with the brutal reality that a boy she had once shared moments with, a boy she had known, was the one who had taken everything from her. It is a tragedy that no one should have to endure, especially not a young girl who had already faced the challenges of adolescence and a complicated relationship. However, the true devastation was felt most by the victim's father. The loss of his children, Daniel and Sophia, and their mother, Jessica, left him completely heartbroken. In the wake of this senseless tragedy, he released a statement that expressed his profound disbelief and sorrow. He described the pain of losing his children and the mother of his children as a feeling he could not put into words. He spoke of the immense difficulty in coming to grips with the fact that his family was gone, taken by an act of violence committed by someone who had once been trusted by the family. The father's words were raw and full of pain as he struggled to make sense of the tragedy that had unfolded in his life. The shock of the entire situation seemed unfathomable for him. How could this happen? How could someone so young, someone who had been in their lives, commit such an atrocity? This question haunted him and many others in the community as they too tried to understand the senseless violence that had ripped apart the lives of the Rodriguez family. To have your loved ones taken so violently, so unexpectedly, and by someone who was once part of the fold, was a reality that seemed too cruel to be true. As the family began to process their loss, the entire community shared in their grief. The Rodriguez family had been known for their warmth and kindness, and their sudden, violent deaths left a hole in the hearts of everyone who knew them. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers rallied around the father in support, offering comfort and condolences in an attempt to ease the unimaginable pain he was enduring. But no words or gestures could ever bring back what had been taken from him. For the family, the emotional wounds would last a lifetime. The death of Jessica, a mother who had worked tirelessly to provide for her children, left a hole that could never be filled. Daniel, a bright 13-year-old boy, had his whole future ahead of him, and Sophia, just 9 years old, had barely begun to experience the world. Their lives, their laughter, their potential, all stolen in a matter of moments. For the father and for Sophia, the question of why would never have an easy answer. The grief of losing a loved one is something that time can never completely heal, especially when the loss is as traumatic as this. The impact of their deaths would linger long after the media stopped covering the case. The heartbreak of the victim's family, the emotional toll on Sophia, and the ripple effects felt throughout Odessa were reminders of how violent acts can destroy not just lives, but entire communities. What happened in that apartment on that tragic night was more than just a crime. It was the tearing apart of a family, of dreams and futures that would never come to be. The community and the family would forever struggle to find peace with the aftermath. The legal proceedings surrounding the 15-year-old suspect were clouded by the complex question of whether he should be tried as a minor or as an adult. Given the severity of the crime, a capital murder of multiple persons, the debate was not just a matter of legal precedent, but also one that would shape the public's perception of the case and the consequences for the young suspect. On one hand, Nathaniel was just 15 years old, still in the formative years of adolescence, where his emotional and psychological development was far from complete. On the other, the brutality of his actions, shooting and killing 3 members of the family, seemed to demand the full weight of the law. The decision to try Nathaniel as an adult or in juvenile court carried significant consequences. If tried as a juvenile, he could potentially face a much shorter sentence, with the possibility of rehabilitation. Juvenile sentences typically offer the chance for parole or release once the offender reaches adulthood, acknowledging that young offenders can change with the right intervention. However, some felt that a crime this violent could not be excused on the grounds of his youth. Prosecutors argued that Nathaniel's actions were deliberate and premeditated, suggesting that his emotional immaturity could not justify such a brutal act. As such, they pushed for the case to be transferred to adult court, where he would face harsher sentencing, including the possibility of life in prison without parole. The public's reaction to the case mirrored the legal debates. Many people expressed confusion and outrage over the idea that a 15-year-old could commit such a crime, and there was strong support for Nathaniel being tried as an adult. The debate touched on the wider issue of how society should treat violent crimes committed by minors. Could a troubled teenager truly be held accountable in the same way as an adult? Or should the focus be on rehabilitation, recognizing that a child's environment and emotional struggles often shape their actions? This case also raised broader questions about youth violence and the factors that contribute to such extreme behavior. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Nathaniel had been struggling emotionally for some time. His turbulent family life, combined with his inability to process rejection and anger, had created a perfect storm of emotional distress that led to the deadly confrontation. Yet, as tragic as this was, it was not an isolated incident. There has been an alarming rise in youth violence across the country, with many cases involving teenagers who, in the heat of a moment, act out in ways that result in irreversible damage. One of the key aspects of the case was how easy access to firearms played a role in the tragedy. Nathaniel's ability to quickly obtain a weapon, a handgun, was a sobering reminder of the risks posed by teenagers having access to firearms. In the heat of his emotional breakdown, Nathaniel did not have to seek out a weapon. he had one readily available. This is a disturbing trend seen in many instances of youth violence, where the impulse to act violently is magnified by the ease with which teens can access guns. Had there been stricter gun control or better monitoring of at-risk youth, could this tragedy have been avoided? As the case continued to unfold in the legal system, the broader societal implications became impossible to ignore. The events in Odessa forced people to ask tough questions about how we treat troubled youth, how we address emotional crises among teenagers, and how we can prevent such incidents from occurring in the future. Mental health support, better family intervention programs, and stronger community networks could have provided the much-needed support Nathaniel lacked. And the question remained, how could a community and legal system help prevent similar tragedies in the future, especially when the signs were often there but went unnoticed? The case of Nathaniel's triple murder also sparked a national conversation about how we, as a society, view juvenile offenders, the impact of family instability, and the potential dangers of untreated emotional distress in teenagers. While the legal outcome would ultimately determine Nathaniel's fate, the deeper question remained: how do we protect the vulnerable youth in our communities before it's too late? The implications of this case would resonate beyond the courtroom, forcing society to confront uncomfortable truths about violence, vulnerability, and the long-lasting impact of emotional pain on young minds. This tragic incident in Odessa, Texas, serves as a stark reminder of how quickly heartbreak and emotional instability can spiral into irreversible violence. The loss of Jessica Rodriguez, her children Daniel and Sophia, is not just a family tragedy. It's a loss felt deeply by the entire community. They were a family full of promise, love, and hope for the future, and yet, in one horrifying act, everything was taken away. Nathaniel, a 15-year-old boy who once had his whole life ahead of him, now finds himself entangled in a violent crime that has shattered his future and irreparably hurt the lives of so many others. What was once a normal teenage experience, dealing with rejection, heartbreak, and the complexities of growing up, became the catalyst for an unimaginable tragedy. For Nathaniel, the pain of rejection by Sophia was the trigger, but this act of violence was not the result of just a moment of heartbreak. His struggles, deeply rooted in a chaotic home life and a troubled emotional state, were signs that he was at a breaking point long before that fateful night. But those warning signs were overlooked or misunderstood, leaving a vulnerable teenager to act out in a way that would haunt everyone involved. For the Rodriguez family, their loss is unfathomable. A mother, two young children, all violently taken in the blink of an eye. They were more than just victims. They were people with dreams, aspirations, and love. Their deaths are a reminder that violence can strike at any time, even in places where it is least expected. As the investigation and legal proceedings continue, the questions linger. What could have been done differently? Could this tragedy have been prevented with earlier intervention, more emotional support for Nathaniel, or perhaps greater awareness of the warning signs? Could the violence have been stopped before it escalated? These questions will continue to haunt the community and the families left behind, long after the headlines fade. As we reflect on this story, we are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about the emotional struggles that many teenagers face. Without the right support and guidance, those struggles can sometimes escalate into something far more destructive. The need for intervention, for early recognition of emotional distress, and for better resources to help troubled teens has never been clearer. This tragedy has brought to light the very real and very dangerous consequences of ignoring the emotional well-being of young people. In the end, this heartbreaking case reminds us of the importance of being present in the lives of those around us, especially the young and vulnerable. Could this have been prevented? That's a question we may never have a clear answer to, but one thing is certain. As a society, we must learn from tragedies like this one and do more to protect the emotional and mental health of our youth before it's too late. As always, we encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments. What do you believe could have been done differently to prevent this tragedy? What do you think should be the legal and societal response to such acts of violence committed by young people? Subscribe to Real Crime Tales for more in-depth, real-life crime stories that continue to spark important conversations. Thank you for watching, and remember, it's essential to stay vigilant in your communities. Together, we can work towards preventing the kind of tragedies that forever change lives.